My name is Vicky, and I'm 56 years old. My world collapsed when my husband Arthur, a successful businessman, died suddenly of a heart attack at just 60. But the real shock came during the reading of the will. His two children from his first marriage, Jonathan and Melissa, each received $15 million. And me. After 12 years of marriage, I got nothing but a letter. Their mocking laughter still echoes in my ears. But inside that envelope was a small key that would change everything. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Trust me, you'll want to see what was hidden behind that mysterious lock, and how a simple key turned my grief into something I never expected. 12 years ago, at the age of 44, I was starting over. My first marriage had ended after 15 years, a relationship that gradually unraveled as we grew into different people with different dreams. I had no children of my own, just a classroom full of third graders who brightened my days as an elementary school teacher in Portland. Teaching was my passion, and those kids kept me going during the darkest days of my divorce. I first met Arthur Harrington at a fundraising gala for the school district. He was there representing his technology company, which was donating computers to underfunded schools. I was invited as one of the teachers who would be implementing the new technology curriculum. Arthur stood out immediately, not just because he was one of the wealthiest people in the room, but because of how attentively he listened to the teachers discussing our classroom needs. "Most executives just write a check and pose for a photo," I told him when we were seated at the same dinner table. "It's refreshing to see someone who actually wants to understand what we do." Arthur smiled, that warm, slightly crooked smile I would come to love so dearly. My mother was a teacher for 40 years. She always said education was too important to be left to politicians and administrators. At 48, Arthur was a widower with 2 children. His wife Sarah had died of cancer 5 years earlier, leaving him to raise Jonathan, then 18, and Melissa, 15. He spoke of them with pride but also concern. "They're still struggling with losing their mother," he confided after we'd been talking for hours, long after most of the other gala attendees had left. "Especially Melissa. She's at that age where a girl really needs her mom." Our relationship developed quickly. Arthur was unlike any man I'd ever known, successful and confident yet kind and unpretentious. He called the day after the gala to ask me to dinner, and within weeks, we were seeing each other regularly. He would listen to my stories about my students with genuine interest, and I found myself fascinated by his journey from a middle-class family to becoming the founder of a successful tech security company. "I never set out to be wealthy," he told me once as we walked along the waterfront. "I just wanted to solve problems that mattered. The money was a side effect." I fell in love with his mind first, then his heart, and finally with the way he looked at me like I was something precious. 6 months into our relationship, he invited me to his home for dinner and to meet his children. That first meeting should have been a warning sign. Jonathan was in college by then, studying business, with plans to eventually join his father's company. At 23, he was polite but distant, his handshake firm but his eyes evaluative, as if he was assessing a potential business rival rather than meeting his father's girlfriend. Melissa, now 20, and in her sophomore year at a prestigious art school, didn't even try for politeness. She was openly cold, barely acknowledging my presence at the dinner table, answering my friendly questions with one-word responses or dismissive shrugs. After they left, Jonathan back to his apartment downtown and Melissa to her dorm, Arthur apologized profusely. "They'll come around," he assured me, squeezing my hand. "They just need time." But time didn't seem to help. As Arthur and I grew closer, his children became increasingly hostile. Jonathan was calculating in his disapproval, making subtle comments about gold diggers, when Arthur wasn't in earshot or asking pointed questions about my finances that made it clear he thought I was after his father's money. Melissa was more overtly antagonistic, rolling her eyes when I spoke deliberately, calling me by the wrong name, or bringing up Arthur's late wife constantly in what felt like an effort to remind everyone that I was an intruder, a replacement, never the real thing. Despite their behavior, Arthur proposed on our one-year anniversary, presenting me with a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "I never expected to find love again," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he knelt before me. "You've brought joy back into my life, Vicky. Will you marry me?" I said yes, without hesitation, even though I knew it meant signing up for a lifetime of trying to win over his children. Arthur was worth it. He was the kind of man who remembered not just my birthday, but the anniversary of my mother's death, showing up with flowers and a shoulder to cry on. He was the man who drove 30 miles to bring me soup when I had the flu, and who left love notes in my lunch bag when I headed off to school each morning. When we told Jonathan and Melissa about our engagement, the temperature in the room dropped to Arctic levels. "Congratulations," Jonathan said flatly, not meeting either of our eyes. "Whatever makes you happy, Dad," Melissa added with a bitter smile. "Mom would want that, I'm sure." Later that night, I overheard them in the kitchen not bothering to keep their voices down. "She's clearly after his money," Jonathan was saying. "A school teacher with no savings to speak of suddenly marrying one of the richest men in the state. Do the math." "It's disgusting," Melissa agreed. "Dad's thinking with the wrong part of his anatomy. Mom's been gone 7 years, and he's replacing her with the first gold digger who batted her eyelashes at him." I never told Arthur what I'd heard. He was already torn between his love for me and his concern for his children's happiness. Instead, I redoubled my efforts to win them over. I learned to cook Jonathan's favorite foods, asked Melissa about her art projects, attended Jonathan's business school graduation, and Melissa's art shows. Nothing seemed to make a difference. Our wedding was a small affair, just close friends and family at Arthur's lakeside vacation home. Jonathan served as best man with visible reluctance, while Melissa declined to be in the wedding party at all, sitting stone-faced in the front row during the ceremony. In our wedding photos, they stand stiffly beside their beaming father, their smiles forced and their eyes cold. The years that followed settled into a pattern. Arthur and I built a wonderful life together. I continued teaching for a few years before eventually retiring to focus on charity work, particularly educational initiatives for underprivileged children. Arthur supported my passion completely, both emotionally and financially, setting up a foundation that I could direct. "You understand what these kids need better than any high-priced consultant," he told me. "I trust your judgment implicitly." At home, we were blissfully happy. Arthur was an attentive husband who never let his work overshadow our relationship. We traveled extensively, maintained a wide circle of friends, and enjoyed simple pleasures like cooking together or reading by the fire on rainy Pacific Northwest evenings. But Jonathan and Melissa remained a painful thorn in our otherwise perfect life. They would come to obligatory family dinners on holidays, accept expensive gifts and financial support from their father, but never fully welcome me into the family. As the years passed, their tactics shifted from outright hostility to a veneer of cold civility that was almost worse because Arthur mistook it for improvement. "See, they're coming around," he would say optimistically after a Christmas dinner, where Melissa had managed to speak directly to me 3 whole times. I never contradicted him. Arthur desperately wanted harmony between the people he loved most, and I couldn't bear to take that hope away from him. So I smiled and nodded, and continued to extend olive branches that were inevitably snapped in half. "I'm sorry they're still so difficult," Arthur said on our 10th anniversary, as we sat on the balcony of our suite in Santorini, watching the sunset paint the white buildings gold. "You've been so patient, so loving, despite everything. I don't deserve you." "You deserve every happiness," I assured him, kissing him softly. "And I found mine the day I met you. Nothing else matters." And I meant it. Despite the strain with his children, our marriage was everything I had ever dreamed of. And more. Arthur was my partner, my confidant, my best friend. I had resigned myself to never having a true family relationship with Jonathan and Melissa, focusing instead on the deep bond I shared with their father. Looking back now, I wish I had known how little time we had left. I would have held him tighter, memorized his face more carefully, told him I loved him 1,000 more times. But that's the tragedy of life, isn't it? We never know when the last normal day is the last normal day. For us, it was a Tuesday in April just like any other. Arthur kissed me goodbye as he headed to his home office, where he planned to work on a new security protocol for his company. I went to a foundation meeting, then grocery shopping. Everything utterly, heartbreakingly normal. Until it wasn't. The morning Arthur died began like any other Tuesday. He woke early as usual, went for his morning run, and returned flushed and energetic, his silver hair damp with sweat. I had coffee waiting along with the protein shake he liked after exercising. We sat at the breakfast nook planning our day as sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the silver in his hair and the laugh lines around his eyes. "I've got back-to-back video calls until 2, he said, checking his calendar on his phone. "But I should be free after that. Want to catch that exhibit at the art museum you mentioned?" "I'd love that," I replied, reaching across to squeeze his hand. "I'll be back from my foundation meeting around 1. He kissed me goodbye at 8, his lips tasting of coffee and mint toothpaste. "Love you, Vicky girl," he said, using the nickname he'd given me early in our relationship. "See you this afternoon." Those were the last words he ever said to me. I was in the middle of my meeting with the Educational Foundation when my phone buzzed with a text from Arthur's assistant, Nancy. "Call me ASAP," it read. Just those 4 words, but something about them sent ice through my veins. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, my hands shaking as I dialed Nancy's number. "Vicky?" she said, her voice tight with tension. "Arthur collapsed in his office. The paramedics are here now. You need to come right away." The next hour is a blur in my memory. I remember driving too fast, running red lights, praying aloud in my car. I remember bursting into the lobby of Arthur's office building to find Nancy waiting, her face telling me everything before she even spoke. "They're taking him to Portland General," she said, grabbing her purse. "I'll drive you. You're in no condition." In the emergency room, a young doctor with tired eyes took me to a small private room, the kind of room where they deliver the worst news. His words came at me like physical blows. "Massive heart attack. Tried everything we could. Too much damage. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Harrington." I remember screaming. I remember falling. I remember a nurse helping me into a chair, someone pressing a paper cup of water into my hands. "I need to see him," I managed to say through lips that felt numb. They took me to him. Arthur lay on a hospital bed, sheets pulled up to his chest, his face peaceful as if he were sleeping. But the vibrant, dynamic man I loved was gone, leaving only this still, empty shell behind. I collapsed across his chest, feeling the unfamiliar coldness of him, the absence of his heartbeat under my ear. I don't know how long I lay there clinging to him before the hospital staff gently suggested I call family members. Nancy had already notified Jonathan and Melissa. They arrived together about an hour later, their faces shocked and pale. For one brief moment, our shared grief transcended all the years of animosity. Melissa broke down when she saw her father's body, sobbing, like the young girl she'd been when her mother died. Jonathan stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscled twitching tears silently tracking down his face. But the moment passed quickly. As the initial shock ebbed, their old suspicions resurfaced harder and sharper for being honed by grief. "What happened exactly?" Jonathan demanded, his voice cold. "Dad was in perfect health. He just had a physical last month." "The doctor said it was a massive heart attack." I explained, my own voice raw from crying. It happened so suddenly. There was nothing anyone could do. Was he under stress? Melissa asked, her red-rimmed eyes narrowing. Were you two having problems? The implication stung like a slap. No, we were happy. We were planning to go to the art museum this afternoon. His diet, then, Jonathan pressed. He mentioned you'd been trying some new health kick. What exactly were you feeding him? I stared at them, unable to believe that even in this moment of devastating loss, they were looking for ways to blame me. The same things he's always eaten. He had his usual protein shake this morning after his run. His run, Melissa seized on this. Was he pushing himself too hard? Did you encourage that? Before I could respond, a hospital administrator approached with paperwork that needed immediate attention. Jonathan quickly took charge. I'll handle this, he said, taking the clipboard. I'm the next of kin. Actually, the administrator said gently, Mrs. Harrington is the next of kin as the spouse. The look Jonathan gave me could have frozen hell itself. Fine, but we'll need copies of everything. The next few days passed in a nightmarish fog. While I was still struggling to accept that Arthur was gone, Jonathan and Melissa sprang into action, taking over the funeral arrangements with military precision. They consulted me only minimally often, presenting decisions as already made. The service will be at St. Mark's, Jonathan informed me over the phone. Thursday at 11. But Arthur wasn't religious, I protested. He always said he wanted something simple by the lake. St. Mark's was where Mom's funeral was held, Melissa cut in sharply. Dad would want to be remembered in the same place. Time and again, I found myself overruled. The obituary they drafted reduced my 12 years with Arthur to a single line, he is survived by his wife, Victoria. The funeral program listed Jonathan and Melissa as giving the main eulogies with me allocated a brief remembrance at the end. The day before the funeral, I discovered I couldn't access our joint checking account. When I called the bank, they informed me the account had been frozen, pending estate settlement. I later learned that Jonathan had contacted them claiming potential irregularities that needed investigation. I had to use my personal credit card to buy a dress for my husband's funeral. The service itself was exactly what Arthur wouldn't have wanted, formal, stuffy, filled with business associates rather than close friends. Jonathan's eulogy focused on Arthur's business accomplishments and legacy. Melissa's was more personal but centered entirely on childhood memories, as if Arthur's life had somehow paused when her mother died and only resumed now with his death. When my turn came, I was so choked with grief and frustration that I could barely speak. I managed a few words about Arthur's kindness, his humor, his generosity of spirit, before breaking down in tears. Later at the reception, I overheard a conversation between two of Arthur's business partners. Bit awkward with the second wife, isn't it? One said quietly. The kids clearly can't stand her. Wonder if there was a prenup, the other replied. Arthur was too smart not to have protected the family assets. I slipped away before they could notice me, finding a quiet corner where I could grieve alone, away from the speculative glances and whispered conversations. It was there that Harold Montgomery Arthur's longtime attorney found me. Harold was in his 70s, a courtly gentleman who had handled Arthur's legal affairs for decades. He had a kind face creased with his own grief. He and Arthur had been friends, as well as attorney and client. My dear Mrs. Harrington, he said, taking the seat beside me. I cannot express how sorry I am for your loss. Arthur was a remarkable man. Thank you, I whispered. I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a terrible dream. Harold patted my hand. I know this is hardly the time, but there are matters we must discuss. The reading of the will is scheduled for next Tuesday at my office. I've already informed Jonathan and Melissa. So soon? I asked, surprised. I had assumed it would be weeks or months before such matters were addressed. Arthur's instructions were quite specific, Harold explained. He wanted everything settled quickly to avoid complications. Something about the way he said complications made me wonder if Arthur had anticipated the difficulty with his children. But before I could ask, Jonathan appeared beside us. "Mr. Montgomery," he said with a nod, "I trust everything is in order for Tuesday." "Yes, all arranged," Harold replied, his professional mask sliding back into place. 10 o'clock at my office. "We'll be there," Jonathan said pointedly, using "we" to exclude me. "Melissa and I have some questions about the estate administration that we'd like to discuss before then. Perhaps we could schedule a private meeting." Harold's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "Any discussions regarding your father's estate should include Mrs. Harrington as well. I'm sure you understand." Jonathan's mouth tightened, but he nodded curtly before walking away. "Don't let them intimidate you, Mrs. Harrington," Harold said quietly, once Jonathan was out of earshot. "Arthur had very clear wishes. That's all I can say for now." His words were meant to be reassuring, I think, but as the days crept toward Tuesday's appointment, they only added to my growing anxiety. What exactly had Arthur planned? And would it bring peace or just more conflict with the stepchildren who had never accepted me? The night before the will reading, I barely slept. I lay awake in the bed. Arthur and I had shared clutching his pillow that still faintly smelled of his cologne, and tried to prepare myself for whatever tomorrow might bring. Arthur had always taken care of me, had always made me feel secure. I couldn't imagine he would leave me vulnerable now. But I also couldn't shake the gnawing fear that somehow Jonathan and Melissa would find a way to push me out of the life Arthur and I had built together, just as they had been trying to do for the past 12 years. Harold Montgomery's law office occupied the entire top floor of one of Portland's older downtown buildings. The conference room where the will reading was to take place featured a massive oak table leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated the view. I arrived 15 minutes early, my stomach in knots, wearing a simple black dress and the pearl necklace Arthur had given me on our 5th anniversary. Harold greeted me warmly, offering coffee, which I accepted gratefully, my hands wrapping around the warm mug for comfort, more than caffeine. "Mrs. Harrington," he said quietly, before the others arrived, "I want you to know that Arthur spoke to me at length about his wishes. Whatever happens today, please remember that he cared deeply about doing the right thing for everyone he loved." Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened and Jonathan and Melissa entered together, followed by a sharp-featured man I didn't recognize, who was introduced as their personal attorney, David Winters. They were dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a family gathering. Jonathan, in a precisely tailored dark suit, Melissa, in a sleek black pantsuit that made her look older than her 32 years. "Shall we begin?" Harold asked once everyone was seated. Jonathan and Melissa sat directly across from me, their expressions unreadable. Their lawyer sat between them, a legal pad ready before him. Harold opened a leather portfolio and put on his reading glasses. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur James Harrington." He began formally. "This document was prepared 6 months ago and replaces all previous wills." 6 months ago. That detail caught my attention. Arthur hadn't mentioned updating his will recently. What had prompted the change, Harold proceeded to read through the preliminary sections. Standard legal language about being of sound mind, revoking previous wills, and appointing executors. Harold himself was named executor with a respected trust company as backup. Then came the distributions. Arthur had been a wealthy man with assets, including his technology security company, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and various personal properties. The will addressed each category methodically. To my trusted business partners, Michael Chen and Daniel Foster, I leave my 51% controlling interest in Harrington Security Solutions to be divided equally between them with the request, but not the requirement that they consider my son Jonathan for a management position if he demonstrates the necessary capabilities and commitment. I heard Jonathan's sharp intake of breath. He had always assumed he would inherit his father's company. This was the first surprise, but far from the last. To the Harrington Foundation for Educational Opportunity, I leave $10 million to continue its mission of providing technology education to underserved communities. The foundation we had built together would continue. That at least was a comfort. To my son, Jonathan Arthur Harrington, I leave the sum of $15 million to be held in trust and distributed according to the terms specified in the attached trust document. To my daughter, Melissa Sarah Harrington, I leave the sum of $15 million to be held in trust and distributed according to the terms specified in the attached trust document. $30 million between them. An enormous sum by any standard, though I noted the trust arrangement rather than outright inheritance. Arthur had always been concerned about his children's financial responsibility. Harold paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. The remainder of my estate, including all real property, not otherwise specifically bequeathed, all investment accounts, artwork, vehicles, and personal effects, I leave to... I held my breath. This was it. The Arthur Harrington Family Trust, to be administered by Montgomery Price and Associates, according to the confidential instructions I have provided separately. Not to me, not directly at least. I felt a wave of confusion followed by a sinking feeling in my stomach. What did this mean? Harold cleared his throat. There is one additional bequest. To my beloved wife, Victoria Lynn Harrington, I leave this letter to be opened privately. From his portfolio, Harold withdrew a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Arthur's familiar handwriting. He passed it across the table to me. The silence in the room was deafening. I stared at the envelope in my hands, aware of everyone's eyes on me. Then Melissa broke the silence with a short, sharp laugh. A letter, Dad left her, a letter, that's it. Jonathan's face, which had been tight with tension, slowly relaxed into a smirk. Looks like Dad finally saw clearly in the end. Their attorney, Mr. Winters, placed a restraining hand on Jonathan's arm, but his expression showed his own surprise at this turn of events. There must be some mistake, I said faintly, looking up at Harold. Arthur and I discussed. He always said, "The will is quite clear, Mrs. Harrington." Harold interrupted gently. "The letter is your specific bequest. The family trust arrangements are separate matters that we will discuss at another time." Melissa leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with triumph. 10 years of playing the devoted wife, and all you get is a goodbye note. How does it feel to know Dad figured out your game in the end? Melissa. Harold warned, but she wasn't finished. We always knew you were after his money. Looks like Dad finally realized it too. That's enough, Harold said firmly. This is neither the time nor place for such comments. But the damage was done. I sat there clutching Arthur's letter, feeling the weight of their satisfied gazes, the humiliation burning through me. After 12 years of marriage, after all we had shared, all they would see was this apparent rejection. Proof in their minds that their father had finally seen me as the gold digger they always claimed I was. If there are no questions about the specific terms read today, Harold continued, we can conclude the formal reading. There are, of course, additional details regarding the trusts that will require further discussion. I think we've heard the important parts, Jonathan said, standing and buttoning his suit jacket with a satisfied air. Melissa and I will be in touch about the trust arrangements for our inheritances, and about Mother's belongings still in the house. I assume those will need to be removed soon. Your mother's belongings, I echoed, momentarily confused. Sarah's things, Melissa clarified coldly. The family heirlooms, the artwork she collected. We'll want those returned to the family. Those matters will be addressed through proper channels, Harold interjected before I could respond. Mrs. Harrington has the right to remain in the residence for 30 days as specified in the will sections we've just covered. 30 days. I had 30 days before I would be homeless. We'll be in touch then in 30 days, Jonathan said with a nod to Harold. Come on, Melissa. I believe we're finished here. As they left, Melissa couldn't resist one parting shot. Enjoy the letter, she said with mock sweetness. I hope it was worth 12 years of your life. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with Harold. The letter felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Victoria, Harold said gently, using my first name for the first time. There are aspects of Arthur's arrangements that couldn't be disclosed in today's reading. I'd like to schedule a private meeting with you tomorrow to discuss them. I barely heard him, still reeling from the public humiliation I'd just endured. Why would he do this, Harold? Why would Arthur leave me nothing but a letter? We had a wonderful marriage. I never asked for his money, never wanted it, except for what it allowed us to do together. Harold's expression was sympathetic but professional. I can't discuss the contents of the letter or Arthur's reasoning. That's between you and him. But I strongly encourage you to read it in private and then meet with me tomorrow. Things are not always as they appear. I nodded numbly, gathering my purse and the envelope. As I stood to leave, Harold added, And Victoria, don't make any hasty decisions before we speak. Arthur was always a careful planner. Remember that. I left the office in a daze, ignoring the receptionist's concerned glance, and made my way to the parking garage. Once inside my car, I sat motionless, the unopened letter on my lap, too overcome to even cry. After everything we had shared, after 12 years of love and partnership, was this really all Arthur had left me? A letter and 30 days to vacate our home. It seemed impossible, contradicting everything I thought I knew about our relationship. I drove home on autopilot, the familiar roads blurring through unshed tears. The house, Arthur's house, not mine, as had been made painfully clear, loomed large and empty as I pulled into the driveway. I'd been staying at a hotel since the funeral, unable to face sleeping alone in our bed, but now I needed the privacy of those familiar walls to read whatever final words Arthur had left me. Inside the house was silent and still preserved exactly as it had been on that Tuesday morning when everything changed. Arthur's coffee mug still sat in the sink. His reading glasses lay on the side table next to his favorite chair. His presence was everywhere, in the books he'd collected, the art we'd chosen together, the photographs of our travels that lined the hallway. I made my way upstairs to our bedroom, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. Whatever Arthur had to say to me, I would face it here in the space we had shared, surrounded by the evidence of our life together. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I finally broke the seal on the envelope, my fingers trembling as I unfolded the thick, cream-colored paper inside. Arthur's familiar handwriting filled the page, the sight of it so achingly familiar that a sob caught in my throat. My dearest Vicky girl, it began, and I could almost hear his voice saying those words. But before I could read further, something small and metallic slipped from the folded pages and fell into my lap. A key, small, old-fashioned, made of brass or some similar metal. I picked it up, turning it over in my palm, completely mystified. What lock could this possibly open? And why had Arthur left it for me in his final letter? With the key clutched tightly in one hand, I began to read, hoping for answers, but fearing what I might find. My dearest Vicky girl, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and for that I'm so deeply sorry. The thought of leaving you alone breaks my heart, but we both know life offers no guarantees, only precious moments to be cherished while we can. I've had to make some difficult decisions about my estate decisions that might seem confusing or even hurtful to you at first glance. Before you read further, please know that everything I've done has been out of love for you and concern for your future happiness. From the day we met, you brought light back into my life. After Sarah died, I existed rather than lived, focusing on my children and my business, because they were all I had left. Then you came along with your warm smile and kind heart, and suddenly I had something to look forward to each day. You never cared about my wealth or status. In fact, I think they made you uncomfortable at times. You loved me for me, and that gift was beyond price. I've always regretted that my children couldn't see what I saw in you. I've tried for years to help them understand the wonderful person you are, but their grief over their mother calcified into something hard and impenetrable. They see you as a threat to her memory and to their inheritance, no matter how unfair or untrue that perception might be. Over the years, I've watched their behavior toward you with increasing concern. The subtle slights, the cold shoulders, the whispered comments they thought I couldn't hear. I confronted them many times, but it only drove them to be more secretive in their hostility. I began to fear what might happen to you if I wasn't around to protect you from their resentment. That's why 6 months ago I made arrangements to secure your future in a way that even they couldn't challenge or undermine. The public reading of my will today would have indicated that I left you only this letter. Jonathan and Melissa will believe this confirms their suspicions that you married me for money, and that I finally saw the truth before I died. Nothing could be further from reality, my love. The key enclosed with this letter opens a safe hidden in my private study in the basement behind the bookcase to the right of my desk. In that safe, you'll find documents explaining everything I've done to protect you. I've worked with a separate attorney, Patricia Morgan, to create arrangements that exist completely outside my visible estate. You see, my clever girl, over the past decade, I've quietly built a separate portfolio of investments and properties that don't appear in any of the financial records Jonathan and Melissa have access to. These assets are substantial, more than enough to ensure you never want for anything for the rest of your life. I know this approach might seem unnecessarily complicated or even deceitful. I struggled with the decision. But I've seen firsthand how bitter inheritance disputes can become, how they can drag on for years, in court draining resources and destroying any chance of family reconciliation. I couldn't bear the thought of you fighting my children for what is rightfully yours, or worse, giving up your share to keep the peace, as I know your generous heart might be tempted to do. This way, Jonathan and Melissa receive inheritances substantial enough to satisfy them, while believing they've won against you. Meanwhile, you'll have resources they know nothing about, can't contest, and can never take from you. It's not ideal. In a perfect world, you would all share equally and openly in my legacy. But we don't live in a perfect world, and my priority is protecting you, the love of my later life, the woman who made my final years my happiest. Go to the safe as soon as you can. Contact Patricia Morgan immediately. Her card is with the documents. She'll help you access everything I've set aside for you and guide you through the next steps. I hope someday my children will come to see the remarkable woman I was blessed to marry. Perhaps when they have the maturity of years and experience, they'll understand that love isn't a zero-sum game, that loving you never diminished my love for their mother or for them. Until then, know that I did everything in my power to ensure your comfort and security. Live well, my Vicky girl. Travel to those places we plan to visit together. Continue the foundation work that means so much to you. Find joy again, even amid grief. That's what I want most for you. Not just security, but happiness. I'll love you always through whatever comes next. Arthur. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. The small key clutched so tightly in my palm that it left an imprint. Arthur's words washed over me in waves of relief, love, and renewed grief for all we had lost. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been protecting me all along in his thoughtful, meticulous way. The public bequest of only a letter wasn't rejection, but strategy, a shield against the very antagonism his children had displayed in the attorney's office. I wiped my eyes, a new determination replacing the despair I'd felt earlier. I needed to find that safe and contact Patricia Morgan as soon as possible. 30 days wasn't much time to secure my position if Jonathan and Melissa were already making plans to remove me from the house. The basement study Arthur mentioned was a room I rarely entered. It was his private sanctuary where he worked on sensitive company projects or retreated when he needed absolute quiet. Now I made my way down the stairs, turning on lights, as I went feeling almost like an intruder, despite having lived in this house for years. The study was exactly as Arthur had left it, orderly but lived in with books lining the walls, a large desk dominating the center of the room, and comfortable leather chairs in one corner where he sometimes sat to read technical journals. The room smelled of him, a mix of the sandalwood cologne he favored and the faint aroma of the pipe he occasionally indulged in, despite my gentle teasing about the health risks. I went to the bookcase to the right of his desk as directed. It looked like all the other bookcases in the room, filled with technical manuals, business books, and the occasional biography of inventors and entrepreneurs Arthur admired. I examined it carefully, looking for some sign of a hidden mechanism. After several minutes of frustration, I remembered something. Arthur's favorite book, the one he reread every year, a first edition of The Last Harbor by James Conroy. It had been one of the first things we discovered we had in common. Both of us loved that obscure novel about a man finding redemption in a small coastal town. The book wasn't on this shelf, though I was certain I'd seen it in this room before. I searched the other shelves and finally spotted it, slightly out of place, protruding about half an inch more than the surrounding books. When I pulled it, I heard a soft click, and a section of the bookcase swung outward, revealing a wall safe behind it. The key from Arthur's letter fit perfectly. I turned it, hearing the satisfying sound of tumblers falling into place, and pulled the heavy door open. Inside were several file folders, a USB drive, and another sealed envelope with my name on it. I was just reaching for the contents when I heard the front door open upstairs, followed by voices. Jonathan and Melissa. I froze, listening as their footsteps moved across the entry hall. "She's not here." Jonathan's voice drifted down. "Good. Let's do a quick inventory of what we need to secure before she gets back." "I still can't believe Dad left her nothing," Melissa replied, her voice smug. "Did you see her face?" "Montgomery mentioned something about a family trust, but that's obviously for us, not her," Jonathan said. "Let's check Dad's office first. That's where the valuable stuff would be." They were coming downstairs. Toward me. Toward the open safe containing the proof of Arthur's real intentions. In a panic, I grabbed everything from the safe, shoved it into my purse, and quickly closed the safe door. But there was no time to reset the bookcase before I heard their footsteps on the basement stairs. I looked around desperately for a place to hide, finally ducking behind the large leather sofa in the corner, just as the study door opened. "This place gives me the creeps," Melissa said, her voice closer now. "Dad spent way too much time down here." "He was working Mel," Jonathan replied. "Something you might want to consider now that you're an heiress. The trust conditions Dad set up aren't exactly a blank check." "Whatever. What are we looking for exactly?" "Financial records, property, deeds, anything that Gold Digger might try to claim wasn't covered by the will. Dad was organized but old school. He kept paper copies of everything important." I held my breath as they moved around the room, opening drawers, rifling through files on the desk. From my hiding place, I could see their legs as they moved past the sofa. "Look at this," Melissa said suddenly. "The bookcase is ajar." My heart stopped. The hidden safe. "Huh," Jonathan replied, and I heard the sound of the bookcase being pushed. "Weird. Never noticed that before. Must not have been closed properly." "Wait, there's something behind it," Melissa said. "It's a safe." "What Dad never mentioned a safe down here." "Well, there's definitely one, but it's locked. We need the combination. Or a key." "The letter," Jonathan said suddenly. "The one Dad left her. What if it contained the key to this safe You think there's something valuable in there? Something she now has access to? I don't know, but I don't like it. We need to find her and that letter, now. They left the study in a hurry, their footsteps pounding up the stairs. I waited until I heard the front door slam before emerging from my hiding place, shaking with adrenaline and fear. They knew about the safe now, and they suspected the letter contained the key. It wouldn't take them long to put the pieces together and realize that Arthur had made separate arrangements for me. I needed to get out of the house immediately and contact Patricia Morgan before they could interfere. I slipped out through the basement's external door, grateful that my car was parked on the street, rather than in the garage where they might see it. As I drove away, I saw Jonathan's expensive sports car still in the driveway. They must have gone looking for me elsewhere in the house. At a coffee shop several miles away, I finally felt safe enough to examine what I'd taken from the safe. The first folder contained legal documents, deeds to properties I'd never heard of, including a beachfront house in Florida and an apartment in Paris. All were in my name, with transfer dates within the past year. The second folder held financial statements for accounts at banks in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. Again, all in my name, with balances totaling over $20 million. There were also stock certificates, bonds, and other investments worth at least another $5 million. The USB drive, when I viewed it on my laptop, contained a video recording of Arthur sitting in the very study I'd just fled, looking directly into the camera. "Hello, my darling," his image said, and fresh tears sprang to my eyes at the sight of him healthy and alive, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they did when he smiled. If you're watching this, then you've found the safe and read my letter. I wanted to explain, in person as it were, why I've done things this way. He went on to detail the assets he'd set aside for me, explaining that they'd been legally transferred into my name over the past several years, through a separate law firm, to keep them completely removed from his visible estate. "It's all completely legal," he assured me. "The taxes have been paid, the transfers properly documented. Patricia Morgan has all the paperwork and will help you access everything. I've also arranged for a new identity protection service through my company to ensure your financial privacy going forward." Toward the end of the video, his expression grew more serious. "I know Jonathan and Melissa will be angry if they discover these arrangements. They may try to challenge them legally, though they won't succeed. More likely they'll accuse you of manipulating me or hiding assets. Don't engage with them on this, Vicky. Let Patricia handle any legal matters. In time, perhaps they'll come to understand why I did this, but I won't risk your security waiting for that day to come." His final words brought fresh tears. "Remember that I did this out of love, not distrust. Not to deceive my children, but to protect my wife. Be happy, Vicky. That's my final wish for you." The third item from the safe was the sealed envelope. Inside was a business card for Patricia Morgan of Morgan Legal Services with a handwritten note from Arthur. "Call her immediately upon finding this. She's expecting you." There was also a key, not old and brass like the safe key, but modern with a security chip embedded in the plastic head. Attached was a tag with an address in downtown Portland. I took a deep breath, gathered my composure, and called the number on Patricia's card. Her assistant answered, and upon hearing my name, immediately put me through. "Mrs. Harrington." Patricia said, her voice warm but professional. "I've been expecting your call. Arthur instructed me to make myself available to you day or night once he was gone. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said, my voice still shaky. "I've found the safe and the documents, but Jonathan and Melissa discovered the safe too, though they couldn't open it. They know about the key in the letter. I think they're looking for me now." "I'm not surprised," Patricia replied, unsurprised. "Arthur anticipated they might become aggressive. Are you somewhere safe?" "For now. I'm at a coffee shop." "Good. Can you come to my office immediately? The address is on my card. We have much to discuss." and I think you'll feel more secure once you understand exactly what Arthur arranged for you. I'll come right away. I agreed, gathering my things. But there's something else. A key with an address. Do you know what that is? Yes, Patricia said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. That's actually our first priority. It's the key to your new home. Patricia Morgan's office was nothing like Harold Montgomery's traditional law firm. Located in a modern building in Portland's Pearl District, Morgan Legal Services occupied a sleek, minimalist space that felt more like a tech startup than a law office. Patricia herself was a surprise. A woman in her early 40s with cropped silver hair, stylish glasses, and an air of brisk competence that immediately put me at ease. Arthur spoke of you often, she said, after we were settled in her private office, a pot of tea between us. He was determined to ensure you were protected after he was gone. I still don't understand why all the secrecy, sir, I said, though the confrontation with Jonathan and Melissa earlier had provided something of an answer. Why not just include me properly in the will? Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. Arthur came to me about 2 years ago with concerns about his children's attitudes toward you. He'd overheard them discussing ways to contest any significant inheritance you might receive. Jonathan had even consulted an attorney about potential grounds for challenging a will that left you substantial assets. I felt sick at this revelation. They were planning this while Arthur was still alive. Unfortunately, yes. Arthur was devastated but also determined not to let them succeed. We developed a strategy to create a completely separate estate for you. Assets transferred gradually and legally during his lifetime, not through inheritance at all. This way, there would be nothing for them to contest. These are your assets now, not Arthur's. They've been yours for months or even years. And the minimal bequest in the will, the letter only. Patricia nodded. A misdirection, essentially. Arthur knew that if his children believed they had won, that he had cut you out of his will, they would be less likely to go digging for hidden assets. It's not an approach I typically recommend, but given the circumstances, it was the most secure way to protect your interests. She walked me through the documentation explaining each asset in detail. The beach house in Florida had been purchased in my name 18 months ago. The Paris apartment a year before that. The financial accounts had been established gradually over the past 3 years, with funds transferred in amounts that wouldn't trigger scrutiny. In total, you have liquid assets of approximately $22 million, plus real estate valued at around $4 million, Patricia summarized. There's also an insurance policy that pays out directly to you. Another $3 million that should arrive within the week. Arthur was very thorough. $29 million. The number was staggering, almost incomprehensible. More than Jonathan and Melissa had received combined. They're going to be furious when they find out, I said quietly, thinking of the scene at the house earlier. If they find out, Patricia corrected. Arthur was very careful to keep these arrangements private. The only people who know the full extent of your assets are you, me, and a financial advisor Arthur trusted implicitly, who helped structure the offshore accounts. Harold Montgomery knows only that Arthur made separate arrangements for you, not the details. But Jonathan and Melissa saw the safe. They know the key was in my letter. They'll put it together. Patricia nodded, acknowledging the complication. That is unfortunate timing. But even if they suspect they can't prove anything without documentation, which you now have. More importantly, there's nothing they can legally do about it. These assets were transferred to you while Arthur was alive, with all proper taxes paid and paperwork filed. They are unquestionably yours. She reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a small flash drive. This contains digital copies of everything, all the documentation, property deeds, account information, plus instructions for accessing each account. Keep it somewhere secure, separate from the physical documents. I pocketed the drive, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the responsibility. What about the key? You mentioned a new home. Yes. Patricia smiled. The address is an upscale condominium building downtown. Arthur purchased the penthouse for you about 8 months ago. It's fully furnished and ready for immediate occupancy. He thought you might need a safe place to go quickly after his death somewhere Jonathan and Melissa don't know about. Arthur had thought of everything. Even in death, he was still taking care of me, anticipating problems before they arose, finding solutions before I even knew I needed them. I suggest you move in today, Patricia continued. Don't return to the house if you can avoid it. I can arrange for a service to pack and move your personal belongings once things have settled down. But the will gives me 30 days in the house, I protested, though, without much conviction. The thought of living there with Jonathan and Melissa circling like sharks wasn't appealing. Legally, yes. Practically, I believe you'll be happier and safer in your new home. Arthur was concerned that his children might make those 30 days very uncomfortable for you. Given what I'd already experienced, I couldn't disagree. What about my belongings? There are things there I can't replace. Photos, mementos, personal items. We'll get them, I promise, but your safety and peace of mind come first. Why don't we go see your new home? Now I think you'll find Arthur has anticipated your needs there as well. The condominium building was one of Portland's most prestigious addresses, a gleaming tower of glass and steel overlooking the river. The doorman greeted Patricia by name, and after she introduced me, welcomed me as a new resident. The private elevator required both a key card and a code which Patricia provided, explaining that I could change the code to one of my choosing later. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer, and I gasped as we stepped into the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city and the mountains beyond. The open-plan living area featured sleek, comfortable furniture that was somehow both luxurious and inviting. Art hung on the walls. Not just any art, but pieces Arthur and I had admired together in galleries over the years, pieces I'd commented on, but we'd never purchased. He's been working on this for months, Patricia explained, as I wandered through the rooms in a daze. Every detail was chosen with you in mind. The master bedroom suite was a sanctuary of calm blues and soft grays, my favorite colors. The adjoining bathroom featured a soaking tub positioned by a window with privacy glass that still allowed views of the city lights. A walk-in closet was partially filled with new clothes in my size, still with tags attached. But what broke me completely was the study. Unlike Arthur's basement workspace, this was clearly designed for me. A teacher's desk I'd admired in an antique store years ago, but had deemed too expensive bookshelves filled with volumes, including many from my wish list and framed photos everywhere. Photos of Arthur and me from our travels, our wedding, quiet moments at home that I didn't even remember being captured. And there on the desk was a small gift box with a card propped against it. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope to find Arthur's handwriting one more time. Welcome home, Vicky girl. May this space bring you peace and new beginnings. All my love, always. Inside the box was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny key. I sank into the desk chair, overcome. Even now he was giving me gifts, sending me messages, making me feel loved from beyond the grave. Patricia had tactfully withdrawn to let me explore on my own. I found her in the kitchen examining the fully stocked refrigerator and pantry. He thought of everything, I said, my voice hoarse from crying. He loved you very much, she replied simply. I've rarely seen a client so determined to provide for someone's happiness, not just their financial security. We spent another hour going through practical matters. How to access the building, where to find important information about the condo, a list of services Arthur had already arranged, cleaning, grocery delivery, private security if needed. As Patricia prepared to leave, She handed me a new phone. All your important contacts have been transferred, but this number isn't known to Jonathan or Melissa. Arthur suggested you might want that separation. I nodded gratefully, taking the phone. What happens now? With the house with them. Now you live your life, Patricia said firmly. The house and its contents, apart from your personal belongings, will be handled through the estate process. Jonathan and Melissa will eventually get what the will specifies. As for your relationship with them, that's entirely up to you. Arthur hoped that someday, once the initial emotions settled, there might be reconciliation. But he also recognized that might not be possible. After Patricia left, I stood by the windows watching the city lights come on as dusk fell. The view was spectacular, but it was hard to appreciate fully through the lens of fresh grief. Arthur should have been here to share this with me. We should have been starting this new chapter together, not me alone while he lay in a newly dug grave across town. My new phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. "We know what you did," it read. "The safe was empty. Where are the documents? Return everything or we'll contest the will and expose you for the thief you are. J&M Mom." They had found a way to contact me already. Their threatening message confirmed everything Arthur had feared. They would never accept me as part of their family, never believe that their father had loved me genuinely, never allow me peace if they could help it. I showed the message to Patricia when she called to check on me the next morning. "Classic intimidation tactic," she said dismissively. "They're fishing, hoping you'll panic and reveal something. They have no grounds to contest the will. It left them extremely generous inheritances, and they certainly can't accuse you of theft when the assets were legally transferred to you by Arthur himself." "Should I respond?" I asked uncertainly. "Absolutely not. Block the number. In fact, I recommend no direct contact with them at all. Any necessary communication can go through me or Harold Montgomery." Following her advice, I blocked the number and tried to put Jonathan and Melissa out of my mind as I settled into my new home and new reality. Patricia arranged for a discreet security service to retrieve my personal belongings from Arthur's house when Jonathan and Melissa were known to be elsewhere. The few times they attempted to contact me through other means, once through a mutual acquaintance, once by actually showing up at the foundation offices, I maintained the boundary of no direct communication. A month after Arthur's death, I received a letter from Harold Montgomery. Jonathan and Melissa had formally requested that I return various items they claimed were family heirlooms, including jewelry Arthur had given me during our marriage. Harold advised that I was under no legal obligation to return gifts, but the decision was mine. After consideration, I decided to return several pieces that had belonged to Sarah, keeping only those Arthur had purchased specifically for me. It was a peace offering of sorts, though I harbored no real hope it would be received as such. I was right. The acknowledgement came in the form of a terse note from Jonathan. "Items received. Several pieces still missing from Mother's collection. Further inventory ongoing. No thank you. No acknowledgement of my gesture. Just continued suspicion and hostility." 6 months passed. I gradually adjusted to life without Arthur finding purpose in continuing the foundation work we had started together and beginning to explore the freedom my new financial situation afforded. I took a trip to the Florida beach house, finding it as thoughtfully prepared as the condo. A bright, airy space, filled with comfortable furnishings and stocked with everything I might need. It was there, sitting on the deck watching dolphins play in the distance, that I received an unexpected call from Harold Montgomery. "Victoria," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I've had a rather unusual meeting with Jonathan and Melissa that I think you should know about." My heart sank. "What now? More accusations?" "Actually, quite the opposite. They've asked me to arrange a meeting with you. They want to apologize." I nearly dropped the phone in shock. Apologize. After everything they've said and done. Why now? Harold sighed. They recently learned some information that apparently changed their perspective. I'm not at liberty to say more, but I believe the request is genuine. I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to refuse to protect the peace I'd finally found. But another part, the part that had loved Arthur and still wished for what he had wished for, was curious. I'll meet them, I decided, but on neutral ground and with you present. The meeting was arranged for the following week in a private room at Harold's Club in downtown Portland. I dressed carefully that morning in a simple but elegant outfit, Arthur's bracelet on my wrist for courage. Patricia insisted on accompanying me, though she agreed to wait outside the meeting room. When I walked in, both Jonathan and Melissa stood. They looked different somehow, less polished, more human. Jonathan's usual immaculate appearance was slightly rumpled, while Melissa's aggressive confidence seemed muted. "Thank you for coming," Jonathan said formally after we were all seated. "We appreciate your willingness to meet with us." "Harold said you wanted to apologize," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm listening." The siblings exchanged glances before Melissa spoke. "We recently discovered some information about Dad's business dealings in the years before he died. Specifically about a series of investments that went very badly." This was not what I had expected. "What investments?" Jonathan took over. "Dad made some high-risk investments about 3 years ago that failed catastrophically. He lost nearly $40 million, almost half his net worth at the time. He managed to recover somewhat before he died, but nowhere near the full amount." I frowned, confused. "I don't understand what this has to do with me or with an apology." "We thought—" Melissa hesitated, then continued with visible effort. "We assumed Dad was worth much more than what was in the estate. We thought you must have somehow taken or hidden a significant portion of his assets before he died." "But now we know those assets were lost years ago," Jonathan added. "The estate we inherited actually represents a remarkable recovery on Dad's part, given the hole he was in. If anything, we received more than we had any right to expect." "How did you discover this?" I asked, still wary. "Through the trust management," Jonathan explained. "The trust requires quarterly meetings with the administrators. During the last meeting, they mentioned the remarkable turnaround after the unfortunate incident with the Asian investments. When we pressed for details, the whole story came out." "We were wrong about you," Melissa said bluntly. "We assumed the worst because it fit our narrative. We never gave you a chance from the very beginning." I sat in silence, absorbing their words. They still didn't know about the assets Arthur had transferred to me. They were apologizing based on incomplete information, believing I had received only the letter, thinking Arthur had left me nothing because there was less to go around than they had assumed. Part of me wanted to tell them the truth, that Arthur had protected me even more generously than he had protected them. But what would that accomplish, except to reopen wounds that might finally be starting to heal? "I loved your father very much," I said finally. "He was the kindest, most generous man I've ever known. Not just with money, but with his heart. All I ever wanted was to make him happy and to be accepted as part of his family. That's still all I want." "We've been terrible to you," Melissa admitted, her usual sharp edges softened by what appeared to be genuine remorse. "During the marriage, and especially after Dad died. I don't know if you can forgive that." "I'm not sure either," I answered honestly. "But Arthur would want me to try. He never gave up hope that someday we might be a real family." "We'd like to start over," Jonathan said cautiously. "If you're willing. No more accusations, no more hostility, just getting to know each other properly this time." I thought of Arthur, of how happy this conversation would have made him. "I think I'd like that," I said slowly. "But it will take time. Trust doesn't return overnight." "We understand," they said almost in unison. As the meeting concluded, Melissa hesitated, then asked, "The letter Dad left you, would it be too personal to ask what it said?" I smiled slightly. "It said that he loved me and that he wanted me to be happy. That's what matters most." They nodded, accepting this partial truth. As we prepared to leave, Jonathan added, "We found a key in Dad's study after you moved out. It doesn't seem to fit anything in the house. We wondered if it might be something important to you." My heart skipped a beat. They had found another key, not the one to the safe which had been in my letter, but something else. "What does it look like?" "Small, brass, old-fashioned. Kind of like an antique desk key." Not the safe key, then. Something else Arthur had left. Something I hadn't yet discovered. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "It might be important. I'd appreciate having it." As we parted ways with tentative plans to meet for dinner the following month, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief that the open hostility had ended, caution about their sudden change of heart, curiosity about this new key and what it might unlock, and beneath it all, a bittersweet sadness that Arthur hadn't lived to see this moment. Outside, Patricia was waiting anxiously. "How did it go?" she asked as we walked to her car. "Better than expected," I replied. "They apologized. They want to start over." "And you believe them?" I considered the question carefully. "I believe they're sincere based on what they know. They discovered Arthur lost a significant amount of money a few years ago, and now they think that explains why I received only a letter. They still don't know about the assets he transferred to me." "Are you going to tell them?" "Not yet. Maybe never." "What would be the point?" "They're finally seeing me as a person, not a threat. That's what Arthur wanted most." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "And the key they mentioned, any idea what that might be for?" "None," I admitted. "But knowing Arthur, it's something meaningful. He loved puzzles and surprises." That evening back in my condo, I stood on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I held Arthur's bracelet between my fingers, the tiny key charm catching the fading light. "You planned it all so carefully, didn't you?" I whispered to the evening air. "Even their reconciliation with me. You knew they'd eventually discover the investment losses and realize they'd misjudged the situation. You gave them enough to make them happy, but kept them from knowing everything, protecting both them and me in your own way." There was no answer, of course, just the distant sounds of the city below. But I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling that wherever Arthur was now, he was pleased with how his plans had unfolded. I still missed him terribly. I still woke reaching for him in the night, still turned to share thoughts with someone no longer there. But the acute pain of those first months had gradually transformed into something more manageable, a tender ache that coexisted with gratitude for the years we'd had together. The mysterious new key Jonathan had mentioned intrigued me. Knowing Arthur, it could lead to anything. Another letter, a sentimental keepsake, perhaps, even another surprise he had planned before his death. Whatever it was, I would cherish it as one more thread connecting me to the man who had loved me so completely, so cleverly, so well. Life would go on. I would travel to the places we'd planned to visit together. I would continue the foundation work that had meant so much to both of us. I would cautiously build a new relationship with his children, honoring his wish for family harmony without sacrificing my own dignity and security. Arthur had given me not just financial stability, but the far greater gifts of absolute love and thoughtful protection. The inheritance that mattered most wasn't measured in millions, but in the certainty that I had been truly, deeply loved by an extraordinary man who had thought of everything, including how to take care of me even after he was gone. I smiled into the gathering dusk, touching the key charm on my bracelet once more. "Thank you, my love," I whispered, "for everything." Have you ever received an unexpected gift that changed your life? Or perhaps found strength in a difficult situation that you didn't know you had? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded that love finds a way even in the most challenging circumstances. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most precious inheritances aren't things we can hold in our hands, but the love that holds us through our darkest times.